The chamber was cold. It was always cold. The grand deliberation chamber of the Galactic Dominion Council floated in space like a great metal shell, orbiting a dying red star 4,000 light-years from a small, blue, mostly ignored planet called Earth. The chamber had held thousands of votes over the centuries. Votes about trade, votes about borders, votes about which planets would be absorbed into the Dominion, and which would simply be erased. Most of those votes had been quick. This one was no different. High Arbiter Veen Solara sat at the head of the long curved table and looked at the file in front of him with the same expression he gave every condemned world, calm, patient, and completely without feeling. He was old, older than most things still living in the galaxy. His skin was a dark grayish-green, layered like old bark. His eyes were pale and flat, like stones left too long in still water. He had overseen 47 planetary assimilations in his career. He expected this one to be the 48th. The file was labeled, Sol System Third Planet Designation, Earth. He opened it with one long finger and began to read. The planet had one moon, one sun, a population of roughly 8 billion beings who called themselves humans. They were bipedal, warm-blooded, and had a lifespan that the Dominion's analysts described as frustratingly short. They had achieved basic space travel. Their fastest ships could reach nearby star systems, but nothing that could challenge a Dominion war fleet. They had nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and several hundred years of recorded warfare mostly against each other. The Civilizational Stability Index gave them a score of 14 out of 100. 14. Veen Solara almost smiled. He had seen scores lower than that, but not many. He looked across the table at the young analyst who had filed the report. Her name was Drea. She was Keth, a species with 6 limbs, large violet eyes, and a reputation for careful, precise thinking. She was young for her rank. She sat very still, which for a Keth meant she was either calm or extremely nervous. Veen Solara suspected the latter. Your report is thorough, he said, but your footnotes concern me. Drea straightened slightly. The footnotes are part of the report, High Arbiter. I felt they needed to be included. You felt, said Admiral Goruk, from the far end of the table, in a voice like grinding rock. He was a large creature, built more like a weapon than a person. His species, the Marak, had never produced poets or painters. They had produced soldiers, tacticians, and very good ship engineers. He had no patience for footnotes. You felt. You are an analyst, not a philosopher. Drea did not flinch. The footnotes document behavioral anomalies observed in the human population over the past 30 cycles of monitoring. I believe they are strategically relevant. Relevant, Goruk repeated, as if the word tasted strange. He picked up a data pad and scrolled through it with visible irritation. You have written here, and I will read this exactly, because I want the chamber to hear it. You have written. Human beings display an unusual and statistically improbable tendency to continue functioning under conditions that would cause psychological or physical collapse in most known species. What does that mean? It means they don't stop. Drea said quietly. There was a small silence in the room. All species resist, said Council Member Fra, a thin creature wrapped in ceremonial robes. She represented a water world in the outer systems, and had the soft, dismissive tone of someone who had attended too many of these meetings. Resistance is natural. It is also temporary. This is different, Drea said. She kept her voice even. In the observation data from the past 100 cycles, humans have faced extinction-level events of their own, making plagues, wars, environmental collapse, and in every case, they rebuilt. Not slowly, rapidly, sometimes within a single generation. They have a word for it in several of their languages. They call it adaptation. Every species adapts, Fra said. Not like this, Drea said. Another silence. Longer this time. Veen Solara looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the file. He turned to the last page, which showed a high-resolution image of Earth from space blue and green and wrapped in thin white cloud. It looked peaceful, small, entirely manageable. Your concern is noted, Analyst Drea, he said, with the tone of someone closing a door. However, The Council does not change its processes based on behavioral footnotes. The data is clear. The planet scores 14 on the Stability Index. Their military capability is approximately 6% of a standard Dominion forward fleet. They have no allies in the wider galaxy. They do not know we exist. All conditions for a simulation are met. He picked up his ceremonial marker, a thin rod of polished black metal, and held it over the file. All in favor of marking the Sol System's third planet for assimilation? Every hand in the room went up. Every claw. Every limb. Even Drea's. Slowly. Because to refuse would have ended her career and changed nothing. Then Solara pressed the marker to the file. Marked for assimilation. Fleet deployment. 14 galactic cycles. The meeting moved on to other business. Trade disputes. Border disagreements. A small colony world in the outer rim that had stopped paying its resource tributes. Normal things. Routine things. Drea sat through the rest of the meeting without speaking. When it ended, and the chamber emptied, she walked back to her monitoring station in the lower decks of the station alone. She pulled up Earth's file again. She read through her own footnotes one more time. She thought about one entry in particular. A behavioral note from 7 cycles ago, pulled from intercepted human communications. A human rescue team had traveled into a collapsed building after an earthquake, digging with their hands when their tools failed, staying underground for 36 hours straight without rest, refusing to leave until every living person had been pulled out. 2 of the rescue workers had died doing it. They had gone back in anyway, even knowing the building might collapse again. She sat with that thought for a long time. Then, almost without deciding to, she left her monitoring thread active on Earth's communication channels. It was a small thing, a minor protocol violation. No one would notice. She told herself it was professional curiosity. She told herself she just wanted to make sure her report was complete. She almost believed it. 3 hours later, a signal pulsed from the direction of the Sol System. Not a distress call. Not a military broadcast. Something entirely different. Something she had no category for in her analytical training. She leaned forward, and she began to listen. The signal was not loud. It did not need to be. Drea ran it through 3 different decryption filters before she understood what she was looking at. Even then, she sat very still for almost a full minute, staring at her screen, reading the same lines over and over again, the way someone might reread a sentence they could not quite believe was real. Then she played the audio. A voice came through. Human. Female. Calm in the way that suggested the speaker had chosen. Calm deliberately, the way someone picks up a tool because they need it. The voice belonged to a woman named Dr. Amara Osei, though Drea would not learn her name until later. At that moment, she was simply a voice, clear, unhurried, and absolutely certain of everything it was saying. The recording had been made inside what Drea's translation system identified as a deep space research station. Helix Station, sitting at the very edge of the Sol System, as far from Earth as humanity had yet managed to push. Drea pulled up the station's coordinates. She had it in her files. She had marked it, early in her monitoring work, as a low-priority scientific outpost. Basic equipment. Small crew. No military significance. She had been wrong about that. Dr. Osei's voice was explaining something. She was explaining it the way a teacher explains something to a student, not because the student is stupid, but because the teacher wants to make absolutely sure nothing is missed. She was talking about fleet movements. Dominion fleet movements. She named patrol corridors that were supposed to be classified. She described supply chain timing that was supposed to be known only to Dominion logistics officers. She outlined a communication relay system that the Dominion had spent considerable resources making invisible. She described all of it accurately. Almost perfectly accurately. Drea's 6 hands went cold. She played the recording again, this time with full analytical tools running alongside it, cross-referencing every claim against her own access to classified Dominion data, line by line, detail by detail. The supply chain timing correct. The patrol corridors correct. The communication relay positions correct to within a margin so small, it was almost insulting. Then Dr. Osei's voice shifted slightly. She moved from describing what she had observed to describing what she believed would happen next. She outlined the Dominion's standard assimilation approach, the forward fleet deployment, the communication blackout, the sequence of orbital pressure before ground forces were committed. She described it step by step, in order, with the correct timing intervals between each phase. Drea sat back in her chair. She felt something she had not felt in 20 years of intelligence work. She felt afraid. Then a second voice entered the recording. Male, quieter, carrying the specific, unhurried weight of someone who has spent a long time thinking about worst-case scenarios and has made peace with all of them. The translation system gave him no name yet. He would turn out to be Commander Idris Vance, the military liaison at Helix Station, former Special Forces, a man who had not panicked in over 15 years of service and did not intend to start now. He said, "We have been watching the watching," he said. "We noticed the observation probes approximately 22 years ago. We identified the monitoring pattern within 4 years. We spent the remaining 18 years learning from it." He said, "Every piece of technology you positioned to observe us, we observed back. Every signal you sent, we traced. Every gap in your patrol timing, we noted." He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was almost conversational. He said, "We wanted you to see what you were recording. We let you watch. We made sure what you saw looked exactly like what you expected to see. A divided, chaotic, primitive planet. Not worth worrying about." Another pause. Drea realized she was holding her breath. He said, "We want you to understand something, whoever is listening to this. We are not primitive. We are not divided, not about this. And we are not afraid of you. We know you have marked our world. We know your fleet is coming. And we have spent 20 years preparing a welcome that you will not enjoy." The recording ended. Drea sat in the silence that followed, and did not move for a very long time. Then she did something she had never done in her career. She played it a third time, not to analyze it, not to cross-reference it, but simply because some part of her needed to hear it again, needed to be sure she had heard it correctly. She had. She flagged the signal as Priority Omega, the highest threat classification in the Dominion's entire system, a classification that had been used fewer than 6 times in 300 years. The flag would automatically pull the attention of the Council's senior security analysts, the Admiral's tactical staff, and Vensolara himself. Within the hour, her communication board lit up with incoming calls from people who outranked her significantly. She answered the High Arbiter first. Vensolara's face on the screen was composed. It was always composed. But something behind his pale, flat eyes had shifted very slightly, the way ice shifts just before it cracks. "You flagged this as Priority Omega," he said. "Yes, High Arbiter." "Explain your reasoning." Drea took a breath. "They knew we were watching. They allowed us to watch. The intelligence profile we built on Earth over 30 cycles was built on information they chose to show us. Every assessment we made was based on a picture they painted for us. The 14 score on the stability index they manufactured that appearance. We do not know their actual capability. We do not know what they have built in the time we believed we were watching them freely." Vensolara was quiet for a moment. "You believe this recording is genuine?" "I cross-referenced every factual claim against classified Dominion data," Drea said. "Every claim was accurate. They should not have access to that information. They obtained it through passive observation alone." She paused. "High Arbiter. They reverse-engineered 30 years of Dominion strategy by watching our probes watch them." The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. For Vensolara, that was extraordinary. "Send me the file," he said. She sent it. An hour later, she received a summons to the council chamber. She walked those corridors slowly, thinking about the rescue workers from her footnote, the ones who had gone back into the collapsing building, the ones who had known the risk and gone back anyway. She had written it off as an anomaly then, a curiosity, a data point that did not quite fit. She understood now that it was not an anomaly at all. It was a pattern, and the galaxy had spent 30 years watching humans, and had managed, completely, to miss it. The leak did not come from Drea. She would spend a long time afterward wondering who it had come from. Probably one of the Council's own security analysts, someone who had been sent the file for review and had made a copy, or passed it along a private channel, or simply made the mistake of discussing it near an unsecured terminal. The Dominion was very good at gathering secrets from others. It had never been particularly careful with its own. Within 3 days, the human recording had been heard by every major government, military council, and intelligence body in the known galaxy. Within 6 days, everyone was talking about it. Within 10 days, the galaxy was a different place. The Dominion Council chamber had been designed to feel imposing. The high ceilings, the dark metal walls, the long table that forced everyone to look up toward the High Arbiter at its head, all of it was built to communicate power, stability, and certainty. It did not feel that way anymore. The chamber felt smaller than it had before. Noisier. Messier. Vian Solara sat at the head of the table and listened to the room fall apart around him with the expression of a being who was very old and had seen many things fall apart, but who was privately beginning to wonder if this one was going to be different. Admiral Goruk's voice was the loudest. It was usually the loudest. "We attack now," he said, for what Drea counted as the 5th time in the session. "We send the forward fleet immediately. We do not wait. We do not deliberate. We hit the Sol system before they finish whatever it is they are building, and we end this conversation permanently." "And if the recording is accurate?" said Ambassador Thys of the Velarai. She was small, pale-skinned, with large dark eyes, and a very calm voice that Drea had noticed people tended to underestimate. "If they truly know our standard assimilation approach, our fleet movements, our timing, what exactly do you expect your forward fleet to accomplish?" Goruk looked at her with the expression he reserved for things he considered obstacles. "I expect it to accomplish the destruction of a primitive planet with nuclear weapons and barely functional spaceships." "They described our fleet movements accurately," Thys said, without raising her voice. "They described our supply chains, our communication relays, our patrol timing. You want to send a fleet through corridors they have already mapped, on a schedule they have already calculated, using a strategy they have already documented in detail." She paused. "I am asking, Admiral, with genuine respect for your experience, have you considered what that sounds like?" The room went quiet. Goruk's jaw tightened. "It sounds like a species trying to frighten us into hesitation. It is a psychological tactic. Then we have nothing to fear from sending a smaller probe force first," said Ven Solara, very quietly, from the head of the table. "To confirm." Goruk stared at him. "A probe force." "A measured, tactical probe, to assess their actual defensive capability before committing the forward fleet." Vian Solara's voice was completely level. "This is standard procedure when intelligence integrity is in question. You know this, Admiral." Goruk said nothing, but Drea could see in his face that he was not satisfied. He was the kind of being who had built his entire identity on the idea that the Dominion did not second-guess itself, did not hesitate, and did not fear anything crawling around on a planet with a 14 on the stability index. But that was outside the chamber. Inside the chamber, Ven Solara outranked him. For now, the argument continued for 6 more hours. While it continued, something else was happening in the wider galaxy. Something quieter, but far more important. The Unbound were listening. They had always been listening. The Unbound were not one species. They were many dozens of civilizations absorbed into the Dominion over the past 2 centuries. Their cultures hollowed out, their resources extracted, their populations reorganized into the vast administrative machine that kept the Dominion running. Some of them had fought back when the Dominion came. Most of them had not, because the mathematics had not favored resistance, and they had been practical enough to see it. They had surrendered, been processed, and been told that cooperation was wisdom. They had been waiting ever since, for something to change the mathematics. The human recording changed the mathematics. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But in the hidden communication channels that the Unbound maintained among themselves, channels the Dominion knew about, but had never successfully shut down the recording, moved like fire through dry grass. Small cells of resistance, on a dozen different worlds, listened to Commander Vance's voice and heard something they had not heard directed at the Dominion in a very long time. No fear, not even a little. On the Velarai homeworld, Ambassador Thys returned from the council session and held a private meeting with 4 other ambassadors from member civilizations that had joined the Dominion under what their histories described as negotiated terms. which everyone involved understood to mean they had been given the choice between cooperation and annihilation. Behind closed doors, with no official record being kept, they talked for a long time about a small blue planet and what it might mean. Back in the council chamber, 3 days after This's private meeting, 2-member civilizations formally requested a suspension of the assimilation order, pending further review. This had never happened before. The Dominion's assimilation process had no formal mechanism for suspension, because until now, no one had ever requested one. The request itself was a crack. Small, but visible. Goruk saw it, and decided to act before it became something larger. He did not go through the council. He went directly to the fleet commanders under his authority. He told them this was a training exercise. He told them the probe data was sufficient. He told them that hesitation was weakness, and that weakness was contagious, and that the way to stop a contagion was to cut it out quickly. He authorized a forward strike on the Sol system's outer boundary. 40 warships. More than enough for a show of force against a civilization that still used chemical rocket fuel in some of its older spacecraft. He expected them to return within a week, with a clear picture of Earth's defenses and, ideally, the ruins of Helix Station. He gave the order on a Tuesday, by the Dominion Standard Calendar. By the following Thursday, he had received no communication from any of the 40 ships. By the Friday, the silence from the direction of the Sol system was so complete and so absolute that even Goruk, who was not by nature a man given to unease, began to sit very still and stare at the communication board and say nothing for long stretches of time. Vian Solara did not say anything to him about the unauthorized strike. Not because he was not angry, his silence was, if anything, a more complete kind of anger than words would have been. He sat at the head of the long table in the cold chamber, and he thought about the human recording, and about the footnotes in Drea's report, and about 40 warships that had gone somewhere and had not come back. He thought about a species with a 14 on the stability index. He thought about how that number had been calculated. He thought about who had given them the data they used to calculate it. In the corner of the room, sitting quietly where she had been told to remain available for questions, Drea watched his face and saw the exact moment that Vian Solara, High Arbiter of the Galactic Dominion Council, began to understand what she had understood in her monitoring station 3 weeks ago. They had not been watching Earth. Earth had been watching them. Drea sent the probe in secret. She had no authorization to do it. She had no authorization for most of what she had been doing in the past 3 weeks, if she was honest with herself. But the council was paralyzed. Goruk had stopped speaking to anyone, and Ven Solara had retreated into a silence that was beginning to feel less like authority and more like something close to fear. Someone had to find out what had happened to the 40 ships. The probe was small, barely the size of a ground vehicle, designed to move without a detectable energy signature. She aimed it at the outer Sol system and sent it on its way, then sat back and waited 9 days for it to complete the journey and begin transmitting. What it sent back changed her in a way she did not fully understand until much later. The outer Sol system was quiet. That was the first thing. Space is always quiet, of course, but this was a different kind of quiet, the kind that follows something rather than precedes it. The probe sensors moved through the region where the 40 ships had entered and began cataloging what remained. There was a great deal of debris. 40 warships produced a considerable amount of material when they were no longer warships. The debris field stretched across a wide corridor of space, fragments of hull plating, drive components, structural supports, all of it cold, all of it still, spread in patterns that the probe's analytical software began to reconstruct into a sequence of events. Drea watched the reconstruction take shape over the course of several hours. She watched it the way you watch, something you are not sure you believe, even as you are seeing it. The 40 ships had entered the Sol system's outer boundary in standard assault formation, a pattern she recognized from the Dominion's tactical playbook. They had moved inward along what would have been, by every calculation available to a Dominion fleet commander, the most efficient approach corridor to the inner planets. They had not known that the corridor had been prepared. The human system, which she would later learn was called the Helix Network, had not met the fleet at the boundary. It had let them in. It had watched them enter, assess their formation, cataloged each individual ship's position, speed, and energy output, and then waited, patiently, in complete silence. Then it had closed the door behind them. The probe's reconstruction showed how it had been done. False sensor echoes signals designed to look like other ships, obstacles, spatial anomalies had been used to herd the Dominion fleet without the fleet ever realizing it was being herded. Individual ships had been subtly redirected, pulled slightly off formation, isolated from their neighbors by what they would have interpreted as navigation adjustments for local debris fields. Within 4 hours of entering the corridor, the 40 ships had been separated into groups of 2 or 3. Each group was alone, surrounded by the vast quiet of space, unable to see the others, believing the separation to be temporary and manageable. It was not temporary. It was the point. The Helix network had then taken them apart, group by group, in a sequence that the probe's analysis estimated had been planned to the minute. Not with overwhelming force. With precision. Each small group of ships was engaged by systems that struck fast, struck accurately, and then disappeared before a counter-response could be organized. There was no sustained battle. There was a series of very quick, very final engagements, each one over before the next had begun. Drea's probe found the wreck of what had been the lead ship, the largest of the 40, carrying Goruk's designated strike commander. It had been taken last. She found out later that this had been deliberate. The Helix network had left the command ship for last, so that whoever was aboard would have time to understand what was happening to their fleet before it happened to them. She found the ship's distress log, the strike commander's final recording. She almost did not play it. She played it. His voice was confused in the way that a very confident being becomes confused when reality stops matching their expectations and they cannot find the frame to process the difference. He was reporting that the fleet was being engaged but could not identify the source of the engagement. He was reporting that ships were going silent one by one and that his attempts to re-establish formation had produced no response. He was reporting that his own ship's defensive systems were registering attack vectors that appeared, disappeared, and reappeared from different directions, with a speed his tactical computer could not track. Then there was a pause in the log. Then he said, in a quieter voice, "They are not fighting back." Another pause. He said, "They are playing with us." The log ended there. Drea sat in her monitoring station and was still for a long time after the playback finished. Then she did the calculation she had been avoiding since she first saw the debris field. She checked the probe data for any sign of human vessels destroyed in the engagement. She found none. Not one. 40 Dominion warships had entered the Sol system. 0 had returned. Not a single human defensive vessel had been lost in the process. The entire engagement had lasted 11 hours and 23 minutes, according to the timestamps on the distress log she was able to recover. 11 hours, less than half a standard day. For the price of 40 ships and every soul aboard them, she reported back to Ven Solara. She showed him the probe data. She showed him the reconstruction. She showed him the final log from the strike commander's ship. Ven Solara watched the reconstruction twice. He listened to the final log once. When it finished, he sat very quietly for a moment, and then he said something Drea had never heard a high arbiter say in the context of an assimilation target. He said, "What do they want?" Drea had been thinking about exactly that question for 3 weeks. "I believe," she said carefully, "that what they want is to be asked." He looked at her. "You want me to open a diplomatic channel to a planet we have already marked for assimilation? I want you to consider," she said, "that we marked them based on data they gave us on purpose, that they have spent 30 years preparing specifically for this moment, that they just destroyed 40 of our warships without losing a single one of their own, and that, so far, they have not attacked us. They have only defended." She paused. "They sent a message before any of this happened. Not a threat. An explanation. They wanted us to understand who we were dealing with before things went any further." She looked at the High Arbiter steadily. "That is not the behavior of a civilization that wants a war. That is the behavior of a civilization that wants a conversation." Ven Solara was quiet again. Outside the station's viewport, the dying star at the center of their orbit pulsed its dim red light across the metal walls. He said, "Can you reach them?" She said, "I already have." She had opened the channel to Helix Station 4 days ago. Dr. Osei had answered on the first ping. She had not seemed surprised. She had said, in a calm and almost friendly voice, "We were wondering when someone would call." The neutral station had been chosen carefully. It sat far from Dominion territory, far from the Sol system, in a region of space that belonged to no one, a small commercial waypoint used by traders and travelers from a dozen different civilizations. It was not impressive. It was not grand. The corridors smelled faintly of fuel, and something that passed for food, in 3 different species cultures. The meeting room that had been arranged was small and plain, with a rectangular table, basic lighting, and chairs that had been modified on short notice to accommodate the different anatomies of the beings about to sit in them. Drea had arranged all of it. She had also, in a quieter and more careful way, arranged something else, a relay that would broadcast the meeting in real time, to every open communication channel in the known galaxy. Vensolara did not know about the relay. She had decided, after a great deal of thought, that he did not need to. The Dominion delegation arrived first. Vensolara, 2 senior council members, a small security escort that he had been persuaded, with some difficulty, to leave in the corridor. He sat at one end of the table in his formal robes, and looked at the door and waited with the expression of a man who was not sure what was about to walk through it, but had committed to remaining calm regardless. The humans arrived 3 minutes later. There were 3 of them. They came through the door without ceremony, without escort, without any of the visual display of military power that the Dominion's diplomatic protocol would have suggested for a meeting of this kind. They wore plain dark clothing. No insignia. No weapons visible. The first was a woman, compact, dark-skinned, with very alert eyes, and the kind of posture that suggested she spent most of her life paying close attention to things. This was Dr. Amara Osei. Drea recognized her voice before she recognized her face. The second was a man quieter in his movements, the kind of quiet that is not emptiness but restraint. Commander Idris Vance. His hands rested still on the table when he sat down, and he looked at Vensolara with an expression that was not aggressive, not nervous, not performative, just awake. The third was a woman who was older than the other 2, with short gray hair and dark eyes that had the specific quality of someone who has spent a very long time looking at very large problems. This was General Yuna Haruto. She sat down last and said nothing for the first few moments, simply looking at the room the way someone looks at a landscape they have been imagining for a long time and are now finally seeing in person. Vensolara spoke first. "I am told you requested this meeting." "We did," Dr. Osei said. "Then I will ask directly," he said. "What do you want?" General Haruto answered. Her voice was even unhurried, carrying the weight of someone who has already decided exactly what she is going to say and has no interest in changing it based on the room's reaction. "We want what every civilization your council has ever marked for assimilation wanted," she said. "We want to be left alone. We want to grow on our own terms. We want to make our own mistakes and learn from them ourselves, without someone deciding from 4,000 light-years away that our progress isn't moving fast enough to justify our continued existence." She paused. The room was very quiet. "We are not asking," she said. Vensolara's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted slightly. "You destroyed 40 of our warships. They entered our system without invitation," Vance said. "We responded appropriately. You could have warned them off." "We sent a warning 3 months ago," Dr. Osei said. She tilted her head slightly. "You received it. Everyone received it. 40 ships came anyway." She let that sit for a moment. "We consider that a response to our warning." We responded in turn. Vensolara looked at each of them in sequence. Then he said, in a quieter voice, "What makes you believe we will accept this? We have assimilated 47 civilizations. We have the largest fleet in the known galaxy. You are one planet." General Haruto reached into the bag she had carried into the room and placed a small data drive on the table. She pushed it across to Vensolara. "That contains 3 things. she said. The first is a complete technical documentation of the Helix network, what it can do, how it works, and what it would cost your fleet to come at us again. We are not hiding our capabilities. We want you to understand them clearly. Veen Solara looked at the drive but did not pick it up yet. The second thing, Haruto continued, is a record of everything we have compiled about the Dominion in the past 30 years. Fleet positions, resource stockpiles, internal political pressures, financial flows, communication encryption keys. She paused. All of it. We are not threatening to release it. We are showing you that we have it. We want this conversation to happen between parties who understand each other accurately. The two senior council members exchanged a glance. Veen Solara's pale eyes moved to the drive and stayed there. The third thing, Haruto said, and her voice shifted very slightly, is a message. Not to you. She looked at Drea, who was sitting against the wall, officially present as a recording officer, officially not part of the delegation. Drea had known this part was coming. She had helped plan it. The third thing on that drive, Haruto said, is addressed to every civilization currently living under Dominion governance that did not choose to be there. It documents, in detail, exactly what we did and exactly how we did it. It includes our complete tactical analysis of Dominion military structure and where its weaknesses are. It includes a communication framework for organizing resistance. It includes technical specifications that could be useful to anyone trying to build their own version of what we built. She paused. We are not releasing it today. We are telling you it exists. And we are telling you that if any Dominion fleet ever enters the Sol system again, it will be released automatically to every channel we can reach. The room was so quiet that the distant hum of the station's air system was clearly audible. Veen Solara sat very still for a long time. He looked at the drive. He looked at the three humans across the table. He looked at them the way he had looked at Earth's file in the council chamber weeks ago, but differently now. Not the way someone looks at a thing they are about to process. The way someone looks at a thing they have completely misjudged and are trying to understand. He picked up the drive. The meeting was recessed for 3 weeks after that. There were arguments inside the council that Drea was not present for, but that she heard about through channels she had developed over many years in intelligence work. Goruk apparently spent the first week insisting that humanity had called a bluff and that the correct response was to call it back. He apparently spent the second week being very quiet. No one reported on what he spent the third week doing. Ambassador Thys of the Velarai formally proposed a motion to grant the Sol system protected independent status. The motion required a 2/3 majority. It did not achieve that on the first vote. It achieved it on the second, after the recordings from the neutral station meeting had finished circulating through every corner of the known galaxy, and 3 more member civilizations had quietly contacted the Council to express their preference for a peaceful resolution. 6 months after the meeting, the Dominion's official record for Earth was updated. The assimilation order was removed. A junior administrative clerk, given no specific guidance on what classification to enter, looked at the file for a long time, and then typed in the only thing that seemed accurate based on everything she had read. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not approach. On the day the update was filed, Drea submitted her formal resignation from the Dominion Intelligence Corps. She had already drafted her application for independent diplomatic observer status. She submitted it the same afternoon. Her requested posting was Earth. The application was processed in 3 weeks, which was, by Dominion administrative standards, almost immediate. That evening, she sat in her quarters on the neutral station, looking out at the stars through a small round porthole. And she wrote in her personal log. She wrote, I have spent 20 years deciding which civilizations were worth preserving and which were not. I used numbers, indexes, stability scores, metrics designed by beings who had already decided what civilization was supposed to look like and simply measured each new world against that picture. I never once asked if the picture was right. She paused. She wrote, Earth scored 14 out of 100. They had wars. They had chaos. They had 100 governments that could not agree on anything. None of that was wrong. I just did not understand what I was seeing. I was looking at a civilization in the middle of becoming something, and I called it failure, because it was not finished yet. She stopped writing for a moment. Outside the porthole, a freighter from somewhere she did not recognize moved slowly through the dark. She wrote, finally, "I spent 20 years cataloging civilizations for the slaughter. I never once asked if they were ready. Earth was the first world that made me wonder who was ever ready for them." She closed the log. She looked at the stars for a while. Then she began to pack.